Alright, hello ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, theys and thems, or whatever fucking pronoun you want to use. It's Daniel D with the What's Wrong with America podcast, and it is Saturday, June 12th, 2021. This episode is entitled, What is Truth? Well, that's one possible title. I haven't yet totally decided on the title as I record this. What is truth? Allegedly, that's what Pontius Pilate asked Jesus, according to the Gospel of John. Or another title, which I may go with, is The Mainstream Media is a Bunch of Lying, Gaslighting Propagandists. Which is true. They are. But before I say that that's true, I have to say what I mean by truth. What is truth? And I don't mean truth, or I'm not going to use it in the sense of like truth with a capital T, the grand philosophical question of epistemology, which is a fancy term that we philosophy types like to use to describe the philosophy of knowledge, man. How do we know what we know and that we know it? How do we know that? But I'm not going to talk about it like that, you know. If you actually are interested in epistemology, suggest Bertrand Russell's classic book, The Problems of Philosophy, in which he talks about, you know, how do we know what we know? But I'm going to use the term truth in a more, you know, everyday kind of layman's, or I don't want to be politically incorrect, so maybe I'll say lay persons, or, you know, lay creatures. That way we include everybody, including people who aren't, you know, male or female. They're transitioning halfway between male and female in the process of transitioning. Anyway, such people, we'll include them by saying the lay creature term, or the lay creature use of the term truth. I'm going to use it to mean, you know, just how do we know, you know, what's going on in the world? How do we navigate the world in such a way that we can get the things we want, avoid the things we don't want, kind of get an understanding of what other people are up to, you know, what systems of government and power and economics and all that are happening that might affect our lives. Yeah, that kind of sense of the term truth, right? So what is truth? Well, I'll tell you what's not true. The narratives pushed over the last few years by the mainstream media. And what do I mean by the mainstream media? I mean primarily like legacy media outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post, as well as cable news like CNN, MSNBC, and so forth. Those guys have shown that they are fucking not to be trusted. Now, I'm not sure why. They've just ditched their journalistic integrity, if they ever had it, and their institutional credibility, you know, which in the case of the New York Times and the Washington Post, I think that once upon a time they did have some kind of, you know, institutional authority or integrity or reputation, you know. Because once upon a time, and if you're a kid and you're doing a report for school, you know, you could go to, say, Encyclopedia Britannica, right? Remember that? Remember when encyclopedias were like in print and somebody would come around trying to sell you a set of encyclopedias every so often, you know? And you wanted to know something, you go look it up in the encyclopedia. Or if you read about it in National Geographic or New York Times or Washington Post, it's like, you know, whatever you read in terms of just facts, it's probably correct. You know, like if you read an article in the New York Times in 1960 and it said, you know, President Eisenhower, you know, did this, you know, Richard Nixon, you know, is proposing this, Kennedy is proposing that, you know, the election, this is what's happening, then chances are it was correct. I mean, at least factually. You know, maybe you would have an opinion piece in the editorial pages where they would, you know, kind of give their opinions, and that may have skewed one way or the other. Maybe they liked Kennedy more than Nixon. I don't know. But, you know, at the end of the day, though, it's like if they told you something was factually the case, like this happened, the who, what, when, where, how, that kind of thing. Like if they said this person did this thing, said this thing at this time in this place, chances are that actually happened, you know? That's not the case anymore. And over the last, you know, I guess the media just decided they hated Trump so fucking much that they were like by any means necessary, we got to get rid of this guy. If it means lying, if it means cheating, if it means stealing, we will do it. We will jettison our reputations individually and, as an institution, as a company, as a publication. We will just shred that and just ditch it, because we got to get Trump out of office. Which was crazy to me because, one of the criticisms that was frequently made, and I think legitimately made of Trump, is that the dude fucking lied, Like, even when he didn't have to, even when there was no benefit politically for lying, even when he didn't need to, even when, there's no incentive that an ordinary person would have for lying in the situation, he would just lie, and he would lie so much that he wouldn't even remember the lie that he just told. But it turns out the mainstream media was doing the exact same shit, which, again, crazy. I don't know. I'm beginning to see that the people on the far right and the far left really have a lot more in common with each other than they do with anybody in the middle. That's another subject altogether, though. But, okay, so here's the thing with lies. I don't like being lied to, and most people don't. If you're in a relationship, for example, like say you're dating somebody and you think, this person's really neat, I know you're supposed to believe all women, but anybody who's been in more than, 2 or 3 relationships has probably come across a woman who lied. Or if you're a woman, who's not a lesbian and you've been with men, certainly you've come across men who lie in a relationship, right? And there's just that moment, if you remember back to a relationship that you had where somebody lied to you, maybe after a few dates or something like that, or, you've spent the night together and, everything seems to be going quite well. And then you discover something that they've told you just ain't true. Like, that maybe something, it could even be something really relatively unimportant, like something about their personal history, their livelihood or whatever, right? But you just find out that the person told you one thing and it wasn't true and that something else was true instead. It may not even be something that, central to the relationship. Like maybe they weren't even lying to you about, cheating on you or something like that. Maybe it was just something basic, like, again, like what they do for a living, or I don't know, there's something where they misled you. You find out that you've been misled. At that moment, most people kind of recoil from the relationship. Like the relationship is effectively over. Like you may have had this kind of optimism about where the relationship could go. Oh, this person seems really nice and interesting and attractive and blah, blah, blah. And so you see like, you're kind of excited about where the relationship could go. And then you find out they lied to you and it's kind of like a, balloon or, well, not a balloon, a beach ball that, has like a, this, you stick with a pin or something like that and the air starts coming out. Like it's never going to be the same again. It's over basically. Or, in a courtroom, right? You have, and I've seen this firsthand, and when I was in law school, I was at a courtroom proceeding. It was like a municipal employee who had due process rights, was like, had a hearing about his termination, right? So and he's even got an attorney and he's making his case. Well, the attorney for the city exposed him in a lie. And it was a lie that the guy didn't even need to tell. Like it didn't really have a lot to do with this situation that led to him getting fired. But it was just some detail that the guy gave about, this is what happened. He was pretty adamant about it. He got caught in a lie, and it was like in that moment, you could just feel the mood in the courtroom just shift. The judge, you could see, was visibly exasperated with the guy because the guy was like busted out in a just complete lie, like, exposed. And so the thing is, it's like, okay, well, maybe this particular lie isn't that important or isn't that, I guess, relevant to the central facts of the case, but it impeaches his credibility as a witness, meaning everything else that he told you is now in doubt. And on top of that, there's this emotional reaction that people have where it's like, man, I don't like being lied to. You insulted my intelligence. You wasted my time. You told me this fib that is obviously a fib and expected me to believe it. And, I'm done with you, right? Well, that's what you do in a personal relationship or in a setting like a courtroom or something like that, where somebody's credibility is important. Or if you're in a job interview, right? Like you can just imagine you're interviewing somebody for a job. Is this somebody I want to have working for me? You discover that they lied about something, on their resume. Maybe you would have hired them had they never made that lie. The lie that they told wasn't something that was going to influence you to actually hire them. But the fact that you discovered that they lied, it just immediately causes a negative emotional response. They fall out of favor with you. Whatever favor they had is gone. You're now unfavorably disposed towards them. You don't want to hire them, whatever, right? But that's exactly, so that's how I felt over the last, few years, but it's particularly over the last year with the mainstream media. I don't like fucking being lied to, and I don't like it especially when people insult my intelligence and ask me to believe something that is obviously not true. Like, do you think I'm a fucking idiot? Do you think I can't see with my own two eyes what the, say for example, a video shows? Like, okay, so some examples. The mainstream media over the last year has lied about the most recent thing that's come to light. And I guess it's something that, since Trump is now out of office, maybe the mainstream media has decided, and their tools in the Democratic Party establishment have decided, all right, we can now start admitting the truth about things, now that Trump's out of office. For example, the whole thing with, I think the name of it is Lafayette Park, the park in D.C. where there's a church, St. John's Church, and it was burned out partially. Trump went, had a photo op of him holding a Bible, which he probably has never read, in front of the church, right? Okay, so it's kind of stupid, but the media went berserk about that. Like, the story was, and this was repeated by Democratic politicians and candidates, it's like Trump uses rubber bullets and tear gas to clear peaceful protesters out of the way so that he can have a photo op. Like, making it look like Trump is like a Hitler type figure where he's just unleashing the Gestapo on these peaceful protesters, using force. He's a dictatorial type of person, right? That was what you're supposed to take away from it. Well, it turns out none of that was true. And in fact, the evidence that it wasn't true was there at the time. The media just chose to ignore it and report as if it was a foregone conclusion, like open and shut case, that this is what Trump did. Well, it turns out he didn't do any of those things. And in fact, the park police had already had plans to clear this area, and it was totally unrelated to Trump. The Inspector General report, confirmed that, and that's been confirmed, again, under the Biden administration. So it's not like you can even say, well, Trump, manipulated the investigation somehow. No, he was out of office. Biden's in the White House, and the Inspector General report indicates that was a lie, right? So that's just the most recent thing. But there's others that, for example, the Proud Boys. Oh, you heard all the time. Proud Boys are white supremacists. Proud Boys are white supremacists. You hear something often enough, especially from like some seemingly reputable people who appear legit. They're wearing suits and ties, right? They're, they just look authoritative. They sound very serious and blah, blah, blah when they talk like this. And it's, so you hear it enough times, people just start nodding their heads. Same thing happened back during, the Bush administration when they were talking about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, right? You just hear it enough times. Eventually people start nodding their heads saying, well, yeah, they got weapons of mass destruction. Yeah, they've used weapons of mass destruction against their own people. They've, whatever, right? That Saddam was supposed to. And then you get into the war and you find out, yeah, that was a bunch of lies. And it just so happened that a lot of people who were in the Bush administration really pushing hard for war, your chicken hawks like Dick Cheney and Wolfowitz and Rumsfeld and people like that, kind of stood to gain if we went to war in the defense industry or the military industrial complex, suddenly had this cash cow gravy train, of all this money flowing towards Iraq, right? They were connected to all these companies that were going to benefit. It just happened to possibly influence their decision to lie to us about it, right? Well, the same thing is going on now with the Proud Boys, in that you hear it repeated so often. in the media that they're white supremacists. Right? So it's like, okay, after a while, I just assumed. I didn't do any research on it. I've never met a Proud Boy, or at least not knowingly. I didn't know anything about them. I just heard, this group mentioned over and over again in the context of white supremacy. And I thought, yeah, okay, whatever. They're white supremacists. I didn't really give it a second thought. Well, then reading an article in the BBC, I guess the British mainstream media reports a little more truthfully on American politics than the American mainstream press. But reading an article in the BBC about the Proud Boys, and then I see a picture of a black guy wearing some kind of paramilitary outfit, and I'm like, who is this guy? Looking the caption for the photo. Oh, the president, Enrique Torres, I think his name is. A black guy. A black guy is the president of the Proud Boys. Read a little bit more in the article or do a little bit more research. It's like 10% of their membership estimated is people of color. So I'm like, what kind of white supremacist organization is this? Is this like Clayton Bigsby, the blind white supremacist black guy from the Chappelle Show sketch? No, it's like he's just a regular black guy. There's nothing about white supremacy in any of the things that the Proud Boys say or stand for. Nothing that indicates that they believe that white people are inherently superior to people of any other race. Nothing about any of that. And in fact, they even have a black guy leading them. So I don't know if they're white supremacists. They seem to hide it pretty fucking well, which is amazing, right? Well, then, you press on it. And why do you label them white supremacists? It's like, well, then they start prevaricating and obfuscating and stammering and hemming and hawing and saying, well, what we mean by white supremacy isn't actually white supremacy. It doesn't mean that people think whites are really superior or, supreme over other races, which is what the fuck white supremacy would mean, literally. But it's like, oh, no, we mean like, that they support a system in which white people are advantaged, and then it's like, dude, you've changed the fucking definition. First of all, you make an accusation knowing the way the charge of racism and white supremacy just is like practically accusing somebody of like pedophilia or something like that. Like, it's just such a serious charge, to make in today's society, right? Where people are canceled, their lives, their careers are ruined, they're ostracized from the mainstream, marginalized, not taken seriously or paid attention to by the mainstream, right? So they're making this charge, expecting it to carry the full emotional weight of what has typically been meant by white supremacy, right? Like, they call somebody a white supremacy and label them as white supremacist enough times, people are going to just start lumping them together with the KKK, with Hitler, with George Wallace, and all that. And then you find out, oh, they're not actually white supremacists. And then they start, well, what we meant this other thing. It would be as if Joe Biden, I was to criticize him for being a pedophile, and then people start, saying, what? That's a pretty serious charge. You're saying that he has sex with children? Where's your evidence? And I just repeat over and over again every time I'm asked, oh, he's a pedophile. And if you need proof, if you're trying to defend a pedophile, maybe you're a pedophile yourself. Somebody finally pins me down and forces me to answer. And I'm like, well, when I say Joe Biden's a pedophile, I don't mean that he actually is sexually attracted to children or that he has sexual dealings with children. I just mean he supports a system in which pedophiles are able to prey on children. It's like, which is actually kind of true. He does support a system in which pedophiles like Jeffrey Epstein are allowed to operate and then mysteriously get whacked when they're caught before they start naming names, But anyway, that's neither here nor there. The thing is, though, is if I'm going to make that charge, somebody's a pedophile, and I don't really mean it, I'm just using it for effect, and I know it's not literally true, but I'm speaking as if it is literally true. But then if I'm called out on it, I backpedal. I'm like, well, I don't literally mean that. I mean, it was like in the sense that, he supports the system. I'm changing the definition. I'm gaslighting at that point, right? Well, that's what the media did with the charge of white supremacy and the Proud Boys. And I'm like, here's an example of how they expect me as a educated adult to see 2 + 2 = 4, to have 2 apples plus 2 apples and to see there's 4 apples, right? But they're telling me, don't believe your eyes, don't believe your common sense, don't believe your intuition, don't believe your reason, believe us. 2 plus 2 really does equal 5. You have 5 apples there. Even if you can't see them all, they're there. Trust us, So it's like in this case, white supremacist group. Trump's in bed with the white supremacists. Trump gets all the support from white supremacist organizations like the Proud Boys, over and over again without ever showing somehow in the American mainstream media the reality. And then you see it and you say, well, why these fucking people have been lying to me this whole time? Why have they been insulting my intelligence, asking me to believe that an organization that has as its leader a black man is somehow a white supremacist organization in the same sense that the KKK or the, whatever Confederate Army in 1865 is white supremacist. Like, it just doesn't compute. They've been lying about BLM. First of all, the whole underlying narrative of BLM is false. This is not to diminish anybody's legitimate lived experience of firsthand encounters with racism, especially those who are older, who came of age in the 70s or 80s or even the 90s. It's like, yeah, Los Angeles, for example, in 1991, or 92 with Rodney King, that era, that's not Los Angeles of 2021. It just ain't, in 1991, you could have these white LA police officers beat the shit out of Rodney King long after he had stopped resisting. Just continue to beat the fucking shit out of him. Fracture his skull, seriously injure him, and get acquitted. 2021, I guarantee you, if 4 or 5 white LA police officers were beating the shit out of a black motorist like that in 2021, first of all, they'd be fired the next day, as soon as the video came out. Second, they would be indicted, they would be charged, they would be convicted. There's no question about that. Look at, Derek Chauvin, in spite of the maybe reasonable doubt about causation, like did he actually cause George Floyd's death in such a way that he would be guilty of murder, as in, not like, was he a contributing factor, but was this a foreseeable result of him kneeling on his neck? Was he actually the primary cause, when in fact Floyd had potentially lethal levels of fentanyl in his system? Never mind, he's convicted, right? Like, things have really changed, and pretending that they haven't changed, like that, what was the norm in 1990 or 1980 or 1970, so that, again, a lot of times when you hear them talk about police violence, they cite anecdotal evidence from people who had experiences with the police in the 70s, 80s, 90s, acting like a one-off encounter 15 years ago is somehow all the evidence you need to convict a system or the people involved in a system today, when that just ain't the case. The people, we'll just take the year 1990. A lot of people who were alive in 1990 no longer alive today. A lot of people who were in power in 1990 no longer in power today. A lot of people that are alive today were not alive back then, and a lot of people who are in power today were not in power back then. It's a different fucking culture, It would be as if comparing, like, I don't know, like if you were to talk about the Chicago Bulls in 2021 and act like it's the same team that Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman played for, and say like, oh, the Chicago Bulls are, known for their incredible rebounding, just look at Dennis Rodman, as if that has any relevance to a game the Chicago Bulls of 2021 might be playing, But that's how they go about making the case that nothing's changed, But if you look at the actual data, look at the stats, all right, there is a group, a demographic, who is most of the people killed by police. And it's white men. It's not black men. It's not blacks. It's whites. It's just a fact. The if you hear about somebody, well, I shouldn't say if you hear about it because this is where the bias of the media comes in. But if somebody is killed by the police this morning, let's just say, odds are it's a white guy. Odds are it is not a black guy. They're the minority of people getting killed by the police. Now, people will say, well, it's disproportionately black people who are killed by the police, relative to their share of the population, because you would expect in a colorblind society, 13% of the population is black, 13% of the people killed by police would be black. And it's actually higher than that. Well, yeah, but if you factor in things like poverty, things like crime rates, things like living in high crime neighborhoods, those factors completely account for the disparity. Once you factor that in, the disparity all but disappears. So what we should be talking about instead of black lives, we should be just talking about police, how police are. That's a legitimate conversation to have. Certainly with, take, for example, the war on drugs, civil asset forfeiture. Those are things that are real, clear and present dangers to Americans' liberty. We should have a conversation about the police, but to make it myopic, like it's all race, that's the only issue that we need to know anything about. That's the only issue that needs to be addressed. Once you correct for racist bias against blacks, that somehow the policing is perfect and nothing else needs to be done. No, it's obviously not true. And in fact, once you do a little bit of digging and you learn about these cases, which there are more of them involving white people getting killed by the police, you start to say, well, why don't these lives matter? Why don't these cases matter? Why aren't they worth talking about? Why aren't their names worth saying? Could it be that we're, the possibility that people are being racist against whites? That's possible. Or B, could it be that there's some kind of power dynamic at play and somebody is wanting to divide the working poor among themselves by race, for example, or ethnicity? Well, if we can convince black people that white people are the enemy and that we woke white people are on their side, but the working class white people are their enemy, and then we can make the working class white people feel resentful towards the working class black people because they feel like they're getting attacked and marginalized, then we can just keep the races fighting each other and we can maintain our power. That could be it as well. And so, coincidentally enough, that's kind of what the slave traders in the South were up to, before the Civil War. Oddly enough, the people in the mainstream media and the Democratic elite are doing the same thing that the slave traders did. Trying to divide and conquer by, using race as a thing like it's an essential feature of your life. That's, people are going to judge you on your race and your race is what matters. It affects your rights and responsibilities as a citizen. It affects what you're able to speak about. If the slave traders would say, if you're black, you can't testify before a courtroom, or you can't serve on a jury. If you're a new woke liberal, you'll say if you're white, you shouldn't serve on a jury, because if we have say, for example, too many white people on a jury, it's not going to be representative, or they're not going to be able to, handle the facts properly. We need more black people on the jury. They're basically doing the same thing. So I don't know why they're doing it, but I suspect it has something to do with power. I suspect that it has something, because it's so obviously false. And that's the thing. It's so, and another thing with race, people say over and over again that Trump is a sign of white racism. That white people are racist, the country is white supremacist, and Trump is proof of that somehow. All right, if that's so, if Trump can be explained solely by reference to white supremacy and racism by whites, then why, from 2016 to 2020, did Trump increase his share of every single demographic except for one? Guess what that is? White males. White males, the only demographic that supported, where Trump lost support from 2016 to 2020. Sounds to me like racism by whites is not explaining that. Like it doesn't even fucking compute. You have the reality and you have the allegation that the media and the Democrats want you to believe. And somehow They expect that you're too stupid to just see facts that flatly contradict what they want you to believe, and that you'll just go along with them. It's insulting to your intelligence. It's insulting to people as human beings. That the media, the talking heads, the liberal elite wants you to believe this bullshit. And I say all this. I didn't vote for Trump either time. I didn't support Trump. I didn't personally like Trump. I didn't like him before he got into politics. I thought the guy was kind of narcissistic. I didn't care for his whole persona, the whole, you're fired, that whole bullshit. I'm like, yeah. I'd rather not work for somebody who gets off like insulting and degrading and demeaning people. Okay, so, maybe that makes me a pussy if you like that kind of thing. If you want to work for a boss who that's how he handles conflict in the workplace, is just insulting people, firing people over very little, you go work for an employer like that, but I have no interest in it, so I never cared for Trump as a person. I didn't care for his style. I thought he was needlessly inflammatory when he didn't need to be. I thought he totally did botch the whole coronavirus, in spite of the lies from the left. I think, the left botched it too, but I would expect, I don't know. I think that if you had a real leader in there who, and it could be somebody on the right, a real leader who could articulate, the reasons for his decisions, not in a way that where you just insult people, but in a way where you really, okay, this is what we're deciding to do. This is what the reality is. That could have been very helpful during the pandemic, when nobody knew what the fuck was going on. It didn't come from Trump. So I say all this stuff. I'm not a Trump supporter. I don't believe in the whole QAnon bullshit conspiracy. None of that. I'm speaking as just a middle of the road, what I take to be middle of the road, American who's educated, who wants intelligent discussion about complex issues, that acknowledges nuance, that acknowledges the multiple sides or multiple ways of viewing the situation, the shades of gray, all that stuff. And I appreciate when people say they don't know. When they I don't know definitively one way or the other, but these are my thoughts on it. This is the information that I have, and this is what I'm working with so far. Like, I like that, which Trump is not that. But man, the left ain't that either. And if you want to know why we got Trump was not a cause. He was a symptom. He was a response to the bullshit, woke, politically correct left that wants to fucking shut down discussions on legitimate issues and say, you either agree with us or you're a bigot. You either agree with us or you're racist. You either agree with us or you're transphobic. And if you're any of those things, we're not saying you're wrong, because we're not going to argue about the merits of what you say. We're not going to argue about whether it's true or false. We're not going to argue about facts. We're not going to argue about logic. We're going to call you names, and if we slap a label on you that puts you in a category that we don't like, that's it. Your career's done. You're out of the public eye. You're shut out of political discourse. So I like the fact that Trump stood up to that. That Trump said, fuck you. I'm not apologizing. And unfortunately, I guess it took that. I mean, I would have liked somebody who was a little more thoughtful and a little more compassionate, and all that, to also be one to say, no, I'm not, you're wrong, and I'm not going to pretend that you're not wrong. In that sense, I would like somebody like a Brett Weinstein as to me, a perfect example of that. Somebody or Jordan Peterson, somebody stands up to the mob, somebody who stands up to the whole bullshit left agenda, without necessarily being on the opposite end of this political spectrum, and also being able to acknowledge where reasonable minds can differ, that can give arguments for their positions on issues, right? And ask intelligent questions. That's what I would like to see. I mean, Brett Weinstein, Eric Weinstein for president would be fucking awesome. Or I know Jordan Peterson is a Canadian, so he can't run for president, unfortunately. I don't know if Michaela, his daughter, is an American citizen. I don't think she was born here. But if she was, that would be great. Michaela Peterson for president, 2024. But yeah, no, the left, the way they just, Proud Boys, racist, even though their leader is black. Like, On some level, it's just such an obvious lie. And yet, so many people fucking go along with it and don't even raise the objection. Like, hey, wait a minute, are we understanding your usage of the term white supremacy correctly? Like, do you mean it in the way that we understand it historically? Because this doesn't seem to match the reality. But you're not supposed to ask those questions. This whole Black Lives Matter protests being mostly peaceful, not damaging. Oh, and in coronavirus, if you protest lockdowns, because say your business that you've put your whole life into is now, you're facing financial ruin, the loss of your livelihood, and you protest that's irresponsible, that's reckless, that's spreading the coronavirus and going to result in deaths. But if you get out there to promote this bullshit non-issue of, Black Lives Matter, that's not going to spread the coronavirus, because the coronavirus is woke. It's comes from China, a communist country, and so of course they got the right, or the left rather, the correct perspective on things. The coronavirus isn't going to jump from person to person in a setting where they're protesting the correct, things. Yet we're told that, like, somehow we're supposed to not ask the obvious questions. Like, wait a minute, if it's okay for people to go protest Black Lives Matter, even if we take the media's lie that they were mostly peaceful protests and that there was limited rioting and it wasn't Black Lives Matter doing the rioting, even if we accept that doubtful premise, the fact that you can't even suggest that large numbers of people congregated together in urban areas to protest anything, for any reason whatsoever, that it somehow matters what their political ideology is. Like, somehow that's going to affect whether they transmit a virus or spread a virus. Like, you can go to, if you're an Orthodox Jew and you're going to have a funeral and you want to attend because it's somebody you love and care about, and you want to show your support for the family and all that, that's irresponsible. And the NYPD will shut down your funeral and arrest you, per Mayor Bill de Blasio, because that is irresponsible. But if you get together to protest for Black Lives Matter, that's not irresponsible. The NYPD won't shut that down. And in fact, if you get arrested, you'll get no cash bail, just out the next day, no matter what you did, because, the coronavirus is certainly not going to spread if your leftist ideology is a shield, a force shield against the coronavirus. It's fucking so obviously false. And yet it just will tell you these things. 2 + 2 = 5. And you see it doesn't equal 5. You see that there's 2 apples + 2 apples. And you can count 4 apples. And they're telling you, don't believe your eyes. Don't believe math. Don't believe common sense. Believe us. 2 + 2 = 5. Yes, you can spread coronavirus too easily if you attend a funeral, if you attend church, if you attend synagogue, if you go to a protest against the lockdowns, you're going to spread coronavirus. But if you attend a protest for Black Lives Matter, not going to spread the coronavirus. And even the fucking CDC, even Fauci, that douchebag, and I'll get to him in a minute, even they were like, yeah, these are not spreading the coronavirus. It's not a risk when you're protesting for Black Lives Matter. Like, really? This is supposed to be the party of science. What kind of scientific position is that? I would love to see the scientific evidence that the coronavirus somehow cares about your political ideology as to whether or not it's going to infect you. Then there's the whole thing about coronavirus, the lab leak hypothesis, buried, early on, and Fauci himself, the man of science, knew that it was a strong possibility, if not a probability, that it came from the Wuhan lab. Now, of course, he and his institutions helped finance the Wuhan virology lab, so maybe that had something to do with why they would want to cover it up. But, somehow we were told that you're racist if you try to suggest that the coronavirus was created in a lab and maybe accidentally leaked, but it was leaked from a lab nonetheless. That was racist, yet somehow saying that it came from the Chinese, having a wet market where they buy and sell wild animals in unsanitary conditions for who knows what reason. That's not racist, but it is racist. And I got that from Glenn Greenwald. He had made that observation, which is, I thought, right the fuck on. Like, how is it not racist to say that? It's spread from these Chinese wet markets. But it is racist to say there was an accidental leak from a virology lab? I don't know. But anyway, that story was buried, right? Like, it was racist to even suggest that it could be a thing. And yeah, turns out it was true. And turns out Trump was right about that, I mean, again, it's like there's the whole Russia gate. They spent all that time, the first few years of Trump's presidency, acting like there was really strong and compelling evidence that Trump was a Russian stooge, that the election was fixed, that Russia threw the election Trump's way, that but for Russia, Hillary would be president, that Trump knowingly worked with the Russians, all this sort of stuff. Turns out, no truth to it. Wasn't true at all. Yet, nobody faced any consequences. Today it's blown over. Nobody's, lost their job at the New York Times or the Washington Post or wherever because they, just ignored contrary evidence and just reported the story that they wanted to be true. That was a thing. But yet pursuing Hunter Biden and this thing with Ukraine, or some of his personal dealings, trading on his dad's name, somehow that story gets buried. The New York Post, a tabloid, is what it takes to report on it. And then social media, big tech, shut it down. You can't share that story. I mean, I don't know. Going back to Black Lives Matter, this predates Trump, but the whole Michael Brown, how that fucking dirtbag gets lumped into other cases that are legitimate, where you say this is an incident of police misconduct. And I think you can pretty clearly see that, for example, Derek Chauvin, his conduct towards George Floyd, that was police misconduct. The police or the state trooper who pulled over Sandra Bland over bullshit, and Malcolm Gladwell gives a great analysis of this in his book, Talking to Strangers. That's an example of somebody who was targeted by police misconduct. Or John Crawford. I mean, there's lots of people that you could identify, or even people like Eric Garner. Like, maybe it wasn't police misconduct, but the whole reason for the police being there in the first place, New York having this punitive tax on cigarettes and not wanting anybody to get around their punitive tax on cigarettes, and so somebody selling loosies, that's something we need to send the guys with the guns and the badges out to put a stop to. In this city, that's a crime against humanity right there, selling an untaxed cigarette. That's a decision. You can't blame the police for that. They were just doing their job. You got to put the blame on, the powers that be for their tax policies, their social policies, their use of the police to basically be revenue or tax enforcement agents. Whatever. That's even an example though. Eric Garner, where you could point to and say, this shouldn't have happened. Michael Brown, no. That guy, he brought it on himself. Fuck Michael Brown. He was a piece of shit. If you think he was a great guy, then, I guess the only way you could really make that point that you think Michael Brown is a great guy and have all the information and really mean it sincerely is if you are one of his, partners in crime, literally, where you like to go around and rob people and just shove people around, beat people up, and take their shit. Because that's basically what Michael Brown was doing. Now, I'm not saying that was why he should have died, but the dude was not a sympathetic person. He was a piece of shit. And in terms of this police officer, Darren Wilson in Ferguson, his interaction with Michael Brown, you had that whole hands up, don't shoot. Oh, Michael Brown was shot in the back or shot, while he had his hands up. He was trying to surrender. He was being peaceful and he was just executed in cold blood. Not true. Not true at all. That was thoroughly debunked. The witness who said that, Michael Brown's friend, was shown to be a total fucking liar in trial. His testimony was completely impeached. Yet the media never retracted that. That whole line, hands up, don't shoot, is still fucking used in stories about Black Lives Matter today, as if it's a real thing. Michael Brown's name is still put out there by the media as if he is an example of somebody who was just executed for no reason in cold blood by racist cops. Not fucking true at all. Michael Brown was a piece of shit. He was shot justifiably by the police officer in defense, reasonable fear for his own life. The shot was fired from within the police cruiser where Michael Brown was trying to wrestle with the police officer for his gun. Michael Brown charged and attacked the police officer. The dude deserved to be shot. And frankly, I don't think society's any worse off for Michael Brown not being here. You know, really the best thing that he could have done for his family was to get killed that day by the police because they got this huge multi-million-dollar settlement. That dude never would have made them that kind of money had he been alive. You know, probably he would have just wound up in prison. You know, I mean, because the dude was a piece of shit. He was just a flagrant criminal, armed robbery, brazen, broad daylight, you know, strong arm robbery or whatever it was. And, you know, I don't think we're missing any cures for cancer. I don't think there's any great inventions or technological breakthroughs that aren't going to happen because this Michael Brown guy isn't around to make them. No, the dude was a piece of shit. He was a fucking zero. And frankly, I'm glad Michael Brown was shot. Fuck him and fuck his family. Fuck Black Lives Matter and that whole lie that wants to make him into some kind of hero, some kind of martyr when he was not. You know, I'm sorry. I mean, I don't like being lied to. And so when I'm expressing this outrage, it's not because, you know, I think that Black lives don't matter. Like you have this cleverly named organization where if you disagree with them somehow, that means you don't think Black lives matter. What? No, I don't like being lied to. I don't like being told you can see the evidence for yourself. And the evidence so clearly in that case goes against the narrative. And yet they still repeat the narrative as if it needs no justification. You know, as if it's so obviously true. They don't even need to stop to authenticate it in any way. And if you disagree, you're racist. You know, I don't like that. I don't like any group that gets enough power that they can dictate what kind of conversations we can and can't have, what kind of facts we're allowed to see, what kind of facts we're allowed to know, what kind of facts we're allowed to acknowledge. I don't like that. It smacks of the kind of religious thinking, the kind of religious hysteria and fundamentalist religious thinking that underlied the witch hunts, the Spanish Inquisition, you fucking name it. But now it's being done on the left in the name of what? I don't know. They're not after racial reconciliation. They're not after racial unity because they're using race so divisively and lying in order to do it. Oh, fuck, man. I mean, at some point, and that's the thing, it's like you just realize you've been lied to over and over and over again. You know, once upon a time, New York Times, maybe it meant something. Maybe they had some journalistic integrity. Maybe CBS News with Walter Cronkite, maybe they seemed authoritative. And maybe they were authoritative. I don't know. They are certainly not authoritative today. The Washington Post, yes, they brought us Woodward and Bernstein and all the president's men. But man, today they are just a propaganda wing for Black Lives Matter. Or a propaganda wing for Democratic, you know, establishment, the DNC. I mean, you know, these same people that go after Russia, you know, the whole Trump-Russia connection for years, and then they don't go after Hunter Biden and the connection with him and some corruption, some corrupt deals in Ukraine. I don't know. I mean, what gives? Why the double standard? They also don't investigate Jeffrey Epstein, like his death. You know, it's just kind of like, oh, yeah, he killed himself. No big deal. You know, oh, well, the cameras just happened not to be working when he died. And the guards just happened to be asleep. And the guards just happened not to make the rounds like they normally make on every other day. But this one, just, yeah, no conspiracy. Nothing nefarious afoot here. Just keep going on about your business, America. Keep watching those, you know, fucking videos on YouTube. Keep streaming your mindless entertainment on Netflix. Yeah, nothing to see here. I mean, why don't they investigate that? That to me is a big story, right? You have Jeffrey Epstein, right? This global predator of children, like a legit sex trafficker who's connected to some high people in high places, right? Bill Clinton, right? Flew aboard the Lolita Express. Bill Gates, you know? I mean, why are we not more interested in getting to the bottom of that? But the same mainstream media that won't fucking let the whole Russiagate thing go when it comes to Trump just accepts at face value this lie. I mean, it's pretty obviously not the whole story, or it's just the most incredible chain of circumstantial events since the Kennedy assassination. No conspiracy here. They just report that, and that's it. No further investigation needed. Case closed. I mean, okay, so the lying and gaslighting propaganda from the mainstream media, either one of two things. Either they believe it, in which case they're just fucking stupid, out of their minds, like not logical at all. Their brains have been hijacked by a virus of whatever religious fundamentalism. Now, their religion doesn't involve God in any way. I guess in that case it's similar to communism, but they nonetheless, they sincerely believe it because they have lost the ability to reason. That's possible. Or they're lying to us and it's part of an agenda where they know what they're doing. And they know that they're lying. And they think that they're going to get away with it. And they're doing it for what reason? I'm not totally sure. I mean, I can take my guesses, just like as I said earlier, the slave traders from the pre-Civil War South used lies based on these false concepts of race and racial essentialism and one race being supreme over another. They used that to divide the working classes against each other, right? Like to keep the working poor whites in check. And they did a nefariously good job of doing it. It was effective. They managed to make divide natural allies against each other and just keep them fighting among themselves. Because the elite white, very rich plantation owners, slave owners, they weren't the ones fighting and dying in the Civil War. It was the poor working class whites who didn't even own the slaves, right? So they did a good job of maintaining their own power by telling a lie often enough and that people believed it. But now you basically have the same type of thing. It's a different type of elite white person. I mean, I think you're pretty well in the elite class if you've attended one of these Ivy League institutions, or if you've attended one of these elite liberal arts colleges where the tuition costs more than most mortgages. I think you're pretty elite. Right, and it's a lot of these white people who've graduated from these institutions and been indoctrinated in the fucking wokest leftist theology from the humanities departments of these places, who now are working so hard to convince poor or working class black people and Hispanics that we're your friends because we're on your side against these white people who are so evil and not us white people, but these white people who are like living in the South or living in a red state or, making most of their money from a W-2, working for a living, earned income. Yeah, those are the people who are your enemy. They're the elites, even though they're not able to cancel anybody, even though they don't control any academic institutions, any mainstream media outlets, even though they're not in power. They demonstrate at Charlottesville. They demonstrate on the Capitol on January 6th. They are the threat to you because, but we, the elite white people, we're somehow on your side. We're on the same team. No, they're not. They're not on the same team, but they're doing it again. They're doing a great job of turning natural allies, i.e. working class people of one race against working class people of another race. Look, you look at the situation today, you got a situation in which people socioeconomic class is the real variable that matters. Not race, not ethnicity, not even religion, socioeconomic class. And a lot of the comedy, that it can be kind of funny, but a lot of it that people would tell the stereotypical white people do this, black people do that. And a lot of times it's told by black comedians, but some white comedians have done it too. A lot of those kind of observations work only if you compare upper middle class to upper class whites with working poor blacks. If you compare working poor whites to working poor blacks, the comparison isn't so extreme. It's really, there's a lot more in common, or if you compare upper middle class black to upper middle class white, again, much more similarities between those two groups than between working poor or poor whites and working poor and poor blacks. I mean, it's like if you're an upper middle class black person, you got more in common with a upper middle class white person than you got with somebody living in the projects, no matter what their color. You know, similarly, if you are one of these trust fund baby rich kids who's screaming, you know, I mean, like I think some of these Black Lives Matter protesters, rioters who were arrested, you know, for violent crimes, like turned out to be people who you know, one girl was like arrested at her family's summer home. You know, go figure, right? Comes from a family rich enough to have a summer home, but somehow she's down with the poor black brothers from the inner city, and she understands their struggle and gets them and all that. No, you know, she's got more in common with, and the thing is, I think people like that, they know they get the mobs incited rioting. They're not going to come out to the fucking, you know, places where the real rich people live. They're not going to come out to where their yachts are and burn down their yachts. They're not going to come out to their fucking mansions and burn their mansions down. They're going to just burn each other's neighborhoods down in the city, you know. And these very elite people are good with that, I guess. You know, I don't know. Bottom line is, I'm sick and tired of the lying and the gaslighting and the propagandists in the media. And I guess in terms of one takeaway being, you know, as far as epistemology goes, just in a daily practical sense, you know, not big philosophical, what is truth, but like just how do you get on in the world? How do you understand or make sense of the situation, you know, politically or socially? I think the Wall Street Journal is still a legit journalistic institution. They have not bought into the bullshit from the left. You know, maybe they're a little right of center. Maybe the fact they're owned by Rupert Murdoch gives them some independence there. But to me, at least, the Wall Street Journal, I read that and don't see this type of sensationalist headlines or the type of one-sided reporting or the type of like, you know, just take our word for it. Don't believe your eyes. Don't believe common sense. Don't believe reality. Believe us, you know, in our narrative. I don't see that from them like the way that I do from New York Times and Washington Post. So maybe the Wall Street Journal is a good place. Also, podcast, man. I'm not just saying that because I'm a podcaster myself, but because I really am grateful for and benefit from good discussions on podcasts like Lex Friedman, Michael Malice, Sam Harris, the Weinstein brothers, Eric and Brett Weinstein, Heather Hying. You know, I'm really fucking grateful for that because it's like, at least it lets you know I'm not alone. I'm not the only one. Because this is one of the things. It's like, it's really like living in this alternate reality of the emperor's new clothes, you know, where somehow you see what appear to be intelligent people, you know, respectable, socially respectable people, you know, in positions of power and influence telling you, no, the emperor's got clothes on and they're great, you know, or maybe even they're debating each other about what color the emperor's clothes are, what outfit the emperor should wear next. You know, in the same way that people made such a ruckus about Obama's tan suit or whatever type of bullshit. You know, it's like, who gives a fuck? That has nothing to do with anything. But that's what people care about. You know, but it's like you're living in this world where that's the discussion that's being had, where it's so obviously dishonest and just disengaged from reality. And anything that really matters, like there's this kind of off topic a little bit or on a tangent, but the Smiths, who I love that band from the 80s, they had a song, Panic, you know, where the chorus is like, hang the DJ. Anyway, well, one of the lines of the song where he's talking about like, because the music they play, it says nothing to me about my life. You know, it's like, or the songs that they endlessly play say nothing to me about my life. Something to that effect. I'm sorry I'm butchering it, but it's a great song. But anyway, that's really what it is. It's like you see the news that's reported. You see the stuff that's put out there by the talking heads, by the pundits, the influencers. And it says nothing to me about my life. It says nothing to me about anything that affects my life, that is important to me, that it's important to, I feel like, most ordinary people. And you start to wonder, like, man, am I the only person that sees this? Am I the only person that sees the emperor ain't wearing any clothes? The emperor's stark fucking naked, you know? And why am I being asked or expected to believe that the emperor has any clothes on at all? Why am I expected to participate cheerfully in this conversation about what clothes the emperor should wear next? About the ins and outs of the emperor's wardrobe and how fashionable it is, when the emperor has no fucking clothes on at all. Like, after a while, it's like, you just don't want to, am I the only person? Is it just me? Like, what the fuck's going on here? Why am I the only person who's bothered by the fact that every media outlet publishes these stories just referring to the Proud Boys as a white supremacist group, like it's an open and shut case, like the allegation needs no substantiation, and then seeing the picture of the president of the Proud Boys and seeing that it's a black guy and saying, what, this just doesn't compute. Like, what the fuck's going on? I need more information. Like, dig a little deeper. Don't just give me this superficial, surface level analysis where you're like, these are the conclusions. We've already made the conclusions for you. You don't need to know the evidence that we considered. You don't need to know our reasoning. You don't need to see our arguments or any of that. You just need the conclusion. Here it is. We've given it to you. We've done your thinking for you. Now go on about your way, America. Just engage in your entertainment, buy useless shit, and just be a good citizen. Vote for Biden, / Harris. I don't know. I mean, I'm glad when you have people out there, podcasters is a big part of this, where you say, okay, thank God, it's not just me. There's other people out there that see the same thing that I'm seeing and call it what it is, which is a bunch of bullshit, and I say this, I'm not a partisan person myself. I'm not like one of those people, like this is one of the critiques I have of Ben Shapiro. I enjoy listening to Ben Shapiro. I think has more intellectual integrity than most pundits who are partisan have, but he's still partisan. So whatever you get from Ben Shapiro, you're not likely to get a real, a very good steel man, consideration of the other side or other sides potentially. You're gonna get, kind of like his case, kind of like when you have a court proceeding, you get attorneys zealously advocating for their side, their client, but they're not going to give you, they're not going to try to be like the judge or the jury and really carefully consider open-mindedly and objectively all the evidence, right? Their job is to just give you their side. Well, that's kind of like Ben Shapiro, but at least he's like more integrity than a lot of partisan have. But I mean, I'm not on a side. I don't give a fuck about right or left. I don't really feel like, because there are things that if I'm in a room full of people who are like Trump supporters, that they will hate me and think I'm a commie because I support, for example, UBI. I think that that's actually a good idea. I've heard Andrew Yang make his proposals and hash them out, thankfully on podcasts that allowed him to do this. And the guy made some good points, I mean, and David Graeber, the sociologist, again, on podcasts, heard him talk about bullshit jobs and how a lot of the jobs that are created, especially in areas of administration or HR, they're really not producing anything useful in society. Like a lot of these jobs are kind of created by institutions in the public and private sector, for reasons other than adding value to the world, right? So there are things that on the right where they would say, dude, you're a fucking commie. And there's plenty of things on the left, especially when we start talking about, like, say, Black Lives Matter, or talking about trans issues, or talking about political correctness, where I'm not at all okay with what's happening on the left. I'm hopeful that somebody like Lex Friedman, now he was born in the Soviet Union, so he wouldn't be eligible. Somebody like Eric Weinstein or Brett Weinstein could run for president and actually get a significant following. I don't see that happening, of course. I mean, just the way things are with the media, with the way most people are fucking stupid. As George Carlin said, think of how stupid the average person is and then realize half of them are even dumber than that, which is true. I've heard Michael Malice talk about how, he... on Lex Friedman's podcast, they kind of debated whether most people are capable of or interested in having deep thoughts about issues. And I agree with Michael Malice. I don't think most people are. I think most people just want to watch their sports team and watch their soap opera and watch their influencer on Instagram and buy their bullshit and play on their phones, and that's it. They're not interested in really thinking deeply about issues in life, you know. But I'm hopeful that enough people are who we can get something different than what we've got. And part of that may be just demanding what's different. Cancel your fucking subscription to these bullshit legacy media outlets and let them know why. And I had to, 2020, when all this shit, when they were just obviously lying to me about the Black Lives Matter movement, I had to do it. When you know in advance that one of these stories breaks, the New York Times, Washington Post is going to completely ignore any facts that don't fit their narrative. They're not even going to report them. Forget about the editorial page, just their front page. They're going to give you factually inaccurate and misleading information. I can't do it. I can't support it. All right. So anyway, sorry I kind of rambled a lot. Look, if you have any thoughts, feedback, you think I'm full of shit, or you think, something that I should consider, by all means, reach out to me. My email address for this podcast is www.apodcast@gmail.com. It's the letters W as in whiskey, which I happen to love as a drink also. W as in whiskey, W as in whiskey, A as in alpha, the word podcast. So www.apodcast@gmail.com. I'll put that in the show notes too. Hit me up, or, I guess if you watch the YouTube clip of this, you can comment there, but I don't really pay attention to YouTube all that much. But anyway, till next time, it's your host Daniel D with the wrong podcast. The What's Wrong with America podcast for Saturday, June 12th, 2021. Hasta luego, fools.